Labor's War, remembering the Safeway Strike of 1978. 1978 was a watershed year for UFCW Local 832. The year saw massive labor disputes and strikes across Canada due to the fight over price and wage control. Negotiations at the Anti-Inflation Board had stalled, which ended in the termination of the board. In particular, workers and unions were told to exercise self-restraint on wages and benefits while inflation increased the cost of living. Thousands of workers went on strike. UFCW Local 832 was front and center during these disputes in Winnipeg. The Safeway strike started with nearly 2,000 Safeway employees going out on strike. Adding to these numbers were the workers at Lucerne, Empress Foods, liquor stores, and the construction industry. All of these factors led to 1978 being the year of the strike. What follows are some of the stories and memories of former Local 832 members and staff about the Safeway strike of 1978.
In 1978, we had a strike with Safeway. The issue was the leftover from the price and wage control. We had signed a collective agreement, I think for 2 or 3 years at the time, and price and wage control came the first year of the contract. And the law was that if you are in a collective agreement, you don't have to follow price and wage control until your agreement expires. So when the agreement expired, I think the price control was lifted, but Safeway still wanted to be under price and wage control. In other words, wanted to give us as little money as possible. And it was really only wage control. Prices, they couldn't control prices. And that's what triggered the strike.
During that time, in 1978, when I was working on bank organizing, Safeway went on strike in Winnipeg, and they were actually in Manitoba. They were by far and away the largest unit that UFCW had in Local 832, about half the membership at the time. So it was pretty much all hands on deck. I mean, they didn't care if I was organizing banks. I was on that Safeway picket line, and I was going to be a union rep. It was one of the first strikes where there was an awful lot of anger. It was a really difficult strike. There were an awful lot of scabs. It was bigger, and people were very frustrated. And the bakery and the milk plant were also out. Safeway's bakery and milk plant were out as well. So there was a lot riding on it. So I worked and was assigned some stores and did some staffing of picket lines, because you know, when you have multiple picket lines all over the place, you need people to kind of keep it together. Picket lines in one place are a little different, but so we each had about six stores or so that we had to look after. We had to organize ourselves to be the point person for those particular stores.
There was select areas where they opened the stores. I was at Portage and Brunel. I forget how long we were out on the street, but then they pulled us and took us over to Ellison Wall because they were open. They wanted us picketing where there was public going in. You know, during the day it was sort of mediocre. We blocked the driveways. We'd go slow. We didn't harass anybody. You know, people talked to you. You explained why we were striking, not because we wanted to, but because the company wasn't being fair, which most companies aren't. And some people were understanding. They would leave. Some people, you're not telling me where I can shop or what I can do. Other businesses would come and support us.
That was in 1978. What we had done, we told the strikers to bring their cars and park right on the Safeway parking lot. It's public access. So we had about 30-some cars from the strikers parked there. And I guess Safeway must have seen them coming out of the car, so they phoned their towing company. And the towing company came up, and Bernie and I were there. We said, "What do you think you're going to do?" And they said, "We're going to tow the cars away." We said, "No, you're not towing those cars away. You don't know if there are people and there are customers or if there are people out on the line here." So no cars were ever towed. The only thing is, we got photographed, Bernie and I, because the company had all kinds of cameras out there. And Bernie and I were supposed to clear the strikers from entering inside the bay where the trucks were backing up to unload their goods. So Bernie and I were supposed to go and tell the strikers to move. Well, we were there all right, but we weren't directing them to get the hell out of the way, so the truckers were stalled, And Safeway tried to make bones out of that. It never went to a court situation, but I know there was some legal action taken, but it didn't go anywhere after that. What they wanted us to do was to stand on each side and leave it open and hold the picketers away from theirs. That was the largest police detachment we ever saw during a strike. Yeah, the reason for that, I think, is because we had approached the Winnipeg Labour Council and Manitoba Federation of Labour, and we had asked their support to load up the parking lot like we had done on Fermor. But on Fermor was only UFCW strikers. So I don't know how many cars showed up, but there was quite a bunch of cars on the parking lot. And then we had a lot of picketers out there, but right the whole front of that store, I'm saying 25 to 30 police officers lined up, just standing there. Nothing happened. They just wanted to make sure that we were not harassing the customers from going in, and that was fine. All we did was we walked in front of the police officers with our line, just kept walking like that. And of course, the line, there was two entrances, one here and one there for the store. So we had enough people that we could cover the whole thing. The officers were there to make sure that the peace was kept, but there was no problem. There was, we didn't get a situation where the cops had to bring somebody away.
And so we had this mass picket scheduled, I think it was a Friday. I don't know who decided this, but the word started going through the crowd that we were just going to slowly leave and go over to Sergeant Maryland. So when I got over to Sergeant Maryland, there was a crowd over there, a big crowd. And things were getting rowdy because I was watching one guy, there was like stripping on the windows, and they were pulling all this stripping off the windows. And it was getting around 9 o'clock. The store was closing. They were bringing out the scabs. And I remember this one young girl, she was crying. I mean, you look out and there's a big crowd, maybe 300 people. It was a mob, and there was a lot of chanting and shouting and stuff. And she was crying, and they brought her out, and they had a station wagon, and they literally just threw her through that back window into the back of that station wagon, and they took off. And there was a guy that came out with a scab, and he worked for the Manitoba Liquor Commission, which is a unionized shop. And he's bringing this girl out. And I'm not a vicious person, but I was caught up in the momentum. And I walked up to him and I grabbed his tie and I says, "What the hell are you doing? You got a scab." And he told me to leave him alone. And then I sort of realized what I was doing, but I was just swept up in the emotion of it. I still remember that and I was scolding him that he should be involved with this scab, because she wasn't a regular worker, she was a hired on. And I thought to myself afterwards, you better be careful. You're going to end up in jail, and then what are you going to do? And so the next time when I went to the mass picket, I was there, but I didn't get involved in anything, because I could have really got myself into some trouble there.
As I said, I never thought there was any such thing as bad publicity in the media. And even though it may have looked that way at times, there was always more goods came out of having a relationship with the media than not having a relationship with the media. Peter Warren was instrumental in settling the Safeway strike, if you can imagine. And here's how it happened. The strike had been going on for some time. And during the strike, he interviewed me, and he had a line open for Safeway or Vic Pynchon to call, and Vic Pynchon did call, and as a result of that, we met and eventually resolved the strike, which is a strange event, but it did happen that way.
It was purely economic. This was an economic strike, and it was over economic issues. And after 8 weeks, it was settled, and I think it was pretty much a saw-off in terms of what people got, but it sure made Safeway not want to have a strike again real soon. And I mean, we wanted more money and they didn't want to give us things. And so, you know, as is the way in most strikes, you don't get everything you walk out for. And the employer doesn't get everything either. With the Safeway strike, it was a matter of flex. I think it was a bit of muscle flexing and that needed to happen. Sometimes, you know, over time, employers, you know, start to infringe on things slowly.
I was glad when it was over because there's a lot of hard feelings. A lot of hard feelings. I was lucky we had only one in our store, but still, we segregated him. And when I went into other stores, I was told that's the table in the lunchroom for the scabs. And I think some of us older people that were on that picket line, we don't ever forget that. We don't ever forget that. At least I haven't. Because it was a big impression on me. And I was very glad to go back to work. And you know, we were almost made to feel like they were doing us a favor, letting us come back to work. I mean, that was my job. And I was there to support my living, to get a fair living from that company who at that time made probably billions. Safeway was very, very big then. I don't think even Superstore was around at that time. But just to get a fair wage. You know, those companies have no conscience. If they can cut you down, they'll cut you down. Like people say, they got stockholders. If I was a stockholder, I'd want to have the company do the best for me. But you know, if you're fair and if you're honest, all the rest comes. You don't have to fight for it. If those companies run their companies fair and honest, their profits will come. Treat their people well. You know, you treat a person well, they'll work hard for you. You treat a person shabby, they say, why should I?
What really got me going in this direction was that strike in 1978. It was a bakery, long hours, hot work, and we had a plant manager who was really not a very nice person. You know, he might have made money for the company, but when in '78, when people were getting married, it was hard to get any time off. People would have a wedding social. Oh, you can't have the time off for that. I mean, if you're getting married, and it was real that. The reason I went for 6 months was mainly because of that manager. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about those issues. I mean, that started it, but it went on so long. Not one person crossed the picket line from the workers, which is unusual. Usually, you know, at some point they'll try and convince some people. At the end of it, he was told to stay up in his office and not deal with any of the people. They hired a new operations who dealt with people on the floor, Bob Treehart. Things became fantastic. But, you know, how people were treated, how they were handled, I think got me going, pushed me in the direction that I was going to.
When I first worked at Safeway, nobody wanted to be a steward. Like I said, they ran away from the union rep and would hide when they come in. But then as the members in the retail industry saw that the union was there to do some good for them, was there to protect them and there to ensure that their rights weren't trampled on, they wanted to be included. And if you have to have people wanting to be included in the process, and if they're not wanting to be included in the process, then it doesn't work. So that's what happens when members in a store see that a representative comes in and stands up and fights for their rights. And then people will say, hey, the union's doing a job. Maybe I should be involved. That's what it's all about.